Hi everyone, how are you? Today I'm going to be sharing with you some high-end DIYs that are easy to make and will give your home a designer look all on a budget. So let's get started. To start this DIY, you will need a square wreath form from the Dollar Tree as well as 6 nautical ropes in jute. And once they are in package, tie off the ends with anything that you have. I used a Chanel tie, being that it was literally what was next to me when I was looking for something to tie off this end. And then after that, all you're going to do is make a braid and tie off the other end. To adhere the braid onto the wreath form, what I'm going to do is just clip the edges of the braid. So I'm using the inner part of the wreath, like the 2 inner wires of the wreath, and I'm just using a clip from the Dollar Tree just to hold it into place. And I'm gonna sew this in with a yarny needle and some twine. If you don't have a yarny needle, what you can do is make one out of like flat floral wire, or you can just use zip ties and it'll work even better. Actually, it's just faster using the zip ties, but I decided to go this route because I really want the edges to stick onto the wreath. So I'm going to be sewing the edges of the braid onto the wreath form. I noticed as I was weaving on one side, the other side of the braid was moving. So in order for it to be a little bit more sturdier, I added just additional clips in the middle just to make that weaving process on the end I was working at a little faster, and then just to guarantee that the full inner part of the wire wreath form was fully covered. Now to work on the outer part of the wreath, we're going to be using burlap. And I didn't do any type of exact measuring like with a ruler or anything like that. The only thing I did was just ruffle up a first one, more or less just to see how I would like the ruffle to look like, and then I used that one as my guide to cut every other piece of burlap. So this is measuring, just by looking at it, about 16 to 18 inches, and just keep in mind if you go anywhere beyond that, you'll probably need 3 rows of burlap. I only used 2. Once you cut up all your burlap pieces, you're going to cut your Chanel ties, and with one tie I'm cutting it in half, and then those halves I'm cutting in half again, so you'll end up with about 6 pieces from one Chanel tie. And I like to call them Chanel ties, but I know they're also known as pipe cleaners. Now to start making our little ruffles, what I'm just going to do is grab one end and just roll it towards me with my fingers, and then I'm just going to tie it in the middle so it more or less looks like a bow. Once you have all of your ruffles together, we're going to add some glue to each end just so that it doesn't fray, and then also it keeps its form. To tie the ruffles onto the wreath, you're going to be using the outer portion of the wreath form. And I didn't mention this earlier, but you're going to be cutting about 24 pieces of burlap because each side of the wreath is going to be taking 6 of the ruffles. And I felt 6 was just enough because there wasn't too much of a gap in between and they didn't look too squished, but it all comes down to personal preference. So if you feel like 6 is maybe too much or too little, adjust it to your liking. At this time, I'm going to go in and color my letter of choice or paint my letter of choice, and I chose black in satin. You can choose whatever color you like, and I also wanted to show you what I did with the beginning and the end of the braided portion of the wreath. So all I did was just glue it to the wire wreath so it's nice and flat and actually very flush to the inner part of the wreath. And then all I'm going to do with the ending is glue that one on top of the rope and then just cut off the excess. My initial vision for this wreath was actually a monogram wreath with the bow, but I didn't like the way it looked with the bow. I felt it was just too much, and I did want to add some fall florals in there to make it look a little bit more fall-like. So what I decided to do is just to wrap the ribbon around the wreath in random places. And in all honesty, there's really no technique for this. All I'm doing is tying it with Chanel ties like we've been doing everything else. And it would probably be a lot more easier if you were to cut the pieces of ribbon and then tie them. I tend to do things the most difficult way, and then when I'm looking back and re-editing, I'm like, I could have just cut those. So there's a little tip for you. With the ribbon in place, now it's time to add the letter. And I realize now that not everyone's going to use the same letter that I'm using. So what I'm going to start doing is just gluing it, and then I'm going to add a Chanel tie to the other end that's hanging where there's no space to hold it up, if you will. So if you're using any other type of letter besides the one that I'm using, what you can do is basically the same process. What we do in wreath making when we're going to hang up any type of sign like this. We actually use Chanel ties and then tie it onto the wreath form so that it's very sturdy. Now to make my wreath look a little bit more fall-like, because it was looking more not like fall, but it's just because of the colors I chose. Anyways, I'm just adding some fall florals on there. Anything that you have works, or with the colors that you're using, since my colors are a little bit more muted and very non-traditional. I actually had some picks from years ago, so I added the pumpkin from that pick and then these little florals that I'm adding in right now, and then I'm going to incorporate some of the other florals that I did pick up this year from Dollar Tree and Michael's.
Thank you.
This next DIY is actually inspiration from some fall pieces that I saw at home this year. And I knew that I could make these for a fraction of the price. They were running about $9.99 a piece, and I knew that if I spent the same amount of money, I could make two. So this is what I'm trying to do. So I'm using two of those foam cones from the Dollar Tree and just some cardboard that I had laying around the house. And what you want to do with the cardboard is actually fold it or just bend it so that it takes like a round shape to form around the cone basically, and then I'm going to measure the cone to that cardboard. Now the size of the cardboard is going to be more or less the size of the dowels that they have at the Dollar Tree, so that's how I measured everything. I realized at this point that I actually folded the wrong side of the cardboard. You want to have the non-printed side of the cardboard to be face down because we're going to be using dowels, and if there is space in between those dowels, you cannot see any of the printed side through those spaces. Now we're just going to glue the cone onto the cardboard, and you're only going to glue the wider part of the cone, being that the narrow part of the cone's not gonna touch the cardboard. So just concentrate on maybe like an inch from the wider part so that it stays on very sturdy. Now it's time to start adding the dowels, and you're going to need about 2 packs and a quarter, so just get 3 of them. And we're going to make them very flush from the top, so when you add them on, you want them to be very flush on the wider portion. The wider portion is actually going to be the top side of our decor piece so that we could stick our fall florals in there. Now that all our dowels are on, we're going to start adding in our fall florals. And I already have one. I'm going to use it as my guide. I don't want them to be identical, but I do want them to look the same, like certain ones. For example, I'm using a couple of picks. I do want the picks to be in the same space just because I want the same height. But there's other things that I'm going to change around. So I'm just using one as my guide to make it similar, if that makes sense. Let me know if you have questions about this down below. You're probably wondering why I'm not gluing down my florals, and that's just because I do like to repurpose a lot of my arrangements. So if I decide to use this in the springtime and they're glued down, it'd just be a lot more harder for me to repurpose it, as opposed to just quickly replacing the florals with what I want to use at that time. The very last step is to add ribbon, and the ribbon that I'm using is from Michaels, and I found it to be the perfect width, and it complemented the colors that I was using this year for fall. I'm also adding a bow, and for this I made a simple bow as if I was tying my shoelaces, and I just twisted the printed part around so that you could see it. If you guys need an in-depth tutorial on this, let me know in the comment section down below. All right, everyone, this is the end of the video. Let me know in the comment section down below which piece was your favorite. I hope this video inspires you to get creative and customize some pieces to fit your decor style. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!